The power's in the people.
Yeah.
It's not the people in power. The power's in the people. And I think whether you look at the citizens who stood up bravely night after night in the blistering cold in Minneapolis, or the folks who stood up in my own state of Georgia 2 weeks ago when they were getting ready to gerrymander those maps, it makes a difference when you push back and stand up.
Hi there, everyone. Absolutely no one in America thinks that there isn't enough money in our politics. But in just a 24-hour period, we learned that the aspiring autocrat who sits in the White House is literally raking in billions with a B of dollars. And the Supreme Court is opening the floodgates to even more money flowing into our campaigns and politics. My guest this week has made it his life's mission to offer an antidote to that kind of flagrant greed and corruption. A pastor who still preaches most Sundays from the Ebenezer Baptist Church, Senator Raphael Warnock embodies the progress that we have made as a country. He's out with a new New York Times bestseller. It's a book titled The Crooked Places Made Straight: Reflections on the Moral Meaning of America. It's a must-read. He warns all of us that we have, quote, moved closer to the politics of January 6th than January 5th, 2021. That was the day that he was elected to the Senate. Without any further ado, this is the best people, and this is one of them, Senator Raphael Warnock. Senator, thank you so much for being here.
So great to be here with you.
I loved getting to talk to you on the show, and I had about 7,000 more questions for you. We really appreciate having this extended time with you.
Oh, great to be with you.
The Supreme Court has left no mistake in anyone's mind, both of its partisan divisions with the words of their opinions. I'll leave the body language for others who are expert in analyzing that, but also in their alignment with not just the MAGA mission, but Donald Trump's mission. Decisions to end temporary protective status, decisions to gut the Voting Rights Act, and decisions this final week to let more money flow into our politics. How are they so misaligned with the things that would make our country more fair and more democratic?
Listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. It's deeply troubling and disheartening to see many of these decisions coming out from the Supreme Court. You know, we count on them to be the umpire, to call balls and strikes. And, you know, mature people know that sometimes Supreme Court rules in a way you like. Sometimes they rule in a way that you don't like.
Yeah.
But this is something different. This is altogether different. The majority is showing themselves to be partisan hacks, in my view. And every day with these decisions, the decision to gut voting rights and the Calais decision, that's the most recent. But before that was Shelby versus Holder, Citizens United. And then, as you point out, in recent days, this awful TPS ruling around Haitians in America, which is rooted in the most racist underbelly of our complicated American story. And yeah, to make it all better, how about more money in politics, more opportunities for elected officials to respond to the wealthy and the well-connected rather than everyday people? It's deeply troubling. I have to say, when I wrote my book, The Crooked Places Made Straight, I knew it was relevant, but my goodness, hasn't it gotten even more crooked than we could have imagined?
I was thinking too that my colleague Rachel Maddow often says, watch what they do, not what they say. And what the conservatives say is, oh, we're not political. But what they do is deeply political. They root some of their more extreme decisions in policies. They sound like they could be applying for jobs for Stephen Miller. But it is their sharpness in their words, sort of refuting the largely dissents from the liberal justices that are the most stark. What do you make of what feel like dire warnings from Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, especially this week, actually in a concurrence around birthright citizenship? What do you make of the divide and the things that they're saying through what they're putting in writing in their opinions?
Um, Look, I'm just very proud. It doesn't make a difference in the outcome right now, but I'm very proud of these justices, all women, on the Supreme Court, who are holding vigil for the best in the American project. And to have one of the justices literally in the TPS ruling read for the court's records Donald Trump's own awful words. They're doing important work, and I want you to think about this. And to your point, they really are behaving as political operatives. And Nicole, I remember the times you're talking about. I mean, it was always interesting to me as a Democrat hearing Republicans say, that's an act. We don't want activist judges. I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican. This is the most activist court
Hmm.
we have seen, certainly in my lifetime. They are clearly carrying out their agenda. John Roberts is a very patient man with a calm demeanor who is finally doing what he was dreaming of doing when he was a young DOJ lawyer during the Reagan era. He's gutting the Voting Rights Act. And if you look at what happened with TPS, and then the reasoning around that, and then the reasoning and argument around Calais is really striking because in
Hmm.
Calais, which
Hmm.
has to do with gerrymandering, the court said, look, you can do whatever you want to black voters. You can draw all kinds of lines around them. You can crack them, meaning separate them into smaller districts so that they can't get any rep. They can't elect a representative. You can pack them all into one so that where they could have had two districts, they've got one. Just don't say it's racial. And if we can't find a smoking gun, if we literally can't find an email that says get all the black people, then you can do whatever you want. And I mean, and
Right.
think about the craziness of it all, because in a real sense, there's a way in which it's not about race. It's about power. It's about partisan advantage, and people are more than willing to use race or anything else if it gives them that advantage. But
Right.
juxtapose that now to the TPS decision, where they basically turn that logic on its head. Here you have some dude, and by that I mean the occupant of the Oval Office, saying the most vile, racist things you could have imagined coming out of the mouth of anyone, no less, let alone a president of the United States, calling the Haitians, saying that they're eating your dogs, eating your cats, calling it an S-hole country, saying that they're bringing AIDS, they're poisoning the blood, all of the most racist and vile things. And the same Supreme Court that said, well, if you can't find the smoking gun with people saying racist things on the gerrymandering, they look at this awful language in a TPS decision and they say, oh, never mind.
Yeah, and it doesn't start and stop there. And I think the reason the liberal justices, and I've wrestled for a decade with how much of Trump's language to censor. He called them shithole countries. And
Yeah.
it was a description that first comes out in his first term. I think John Kelly was his chief of staff. And he's talking about people coming from shithole countries.
Yep.
And the justices don't shave it off, right? They quote him accurately. And, Access Hollywood. But I wonder if we've made a mistake in shaving off the shocking crudeness of Donald Trump, if that's part of what has aided him.
I don't know. I think anybody who's paying attention can see what he's doing, can hear what he's saying. I think what is killing us is that we have a bunch of enablers in Congress who are lining up, acting as if this stuff is normal, who sort of shirk and find reasons. Everybody's got a different reason for why they're going along with this. And then all of a sudden, sometimes when they're in a pinch, when they're on their way out the door or have been kicked out of the door by Donald Trump, they
Yeah.
all of a sudden grow a spine and start saying things that we needed them to say a long time ago. I've got, colleagues. I'm trying to be nice here, but I've got colleagues in the Senate who even after bending the knee or just trying to go along, have found themselves kicked by Donald Trump and now on their way out the door. I just wish we could have seen more of that courage when they were confirming Robert F. Kennedy to be
Mhm.
the secretary of HHS. And we could have
Mhm.
seen some of that courage when they were confirming Hegseth, who shouldn't be anywhere near the Department of Defense, which they now call the Department of War. What's been striking is his enablers. And so what we've got to do is hold them accountable. We've got to put some guardrails on this president. And he's doing everything he can to prevent us from being able to do that, even to the point of hijacking a bipartisan housing bill that he had said he was going to sign. He now cast it aside and say, no, what I really need you to do right now is pass the SAVE Act, make it harder for people in the coalition that's going to hold him accountable to vote.
I mean, the housing bill is so popular that it kind of broke through our fractured politics. It is the rare bipartisan
Yeah.
accomplishment that Republicans could tout, and it would have aided Donald Trump to sign that into law. How developed do you think his plan is to rig or interfere in or call off, I guess, in the most extreme, the midterms, that he would thwart a bipartisan bill that would help him?
Yeah, I mean, just think about the irony of that. Donald Trump said that he would lower people's costs on day one. And, here we are nearly 2 years into his presidency, and inflation is high, grocery bills are high, utility bills are high, health insurance is unaffordable. We have a real housing affordability crisis in this country. And the Republicans have nothing to show for what they've done to bring any relief at all. And here comes this housing bill, bipartisan. I'm a member of the committee, the Housing and Banking and Housing Committee. It passed our committee unanimously. Every Democrat, every Republican voted for it. Think about it. Tim Scott is the chair, and Elizabeth Warren is the ranking member. And we passed it out of our committee unanimously. It's passed the Senate, passed the House, and the President of the United States says, when given a chance to do something for Americans who are feeling crushed by this affordability crisis, says, no, it's more important to save my power, because that's what the SAVE Act is. It's about
Mhm.
saving Donald Trump's power. So that seems to be the whole game. The whole game is focused on redrawing lines, passing a voter suppression bill, stirring doubt in an election, sending the FBI into Fulton County, Georgia to literally seize ballots,
Mhm.
to create a context and a pretext for engaging in some mischief if the outcome does not go his way. That's what he's doing. He's seeding and poisoning the wells of our democracy. So it's hard to talk. It's hard to overstate what's at stake in this upcoming election. The good news is we're showing that when people show up, it makes a difference. I'm proud that Georgia stood up. They were getting ready to gerrymander our maps also for 28,
Mhm.
and hundreds of Georgians showed up at the state capitol. And because I thought it was so important, even though we were in session, I left Washington that day. I thought I could miss a vote in order to save the people's votes so that they
Mhm.
matter. And we raised such a ruckus that it frightened them. And they said, well, we better not do this because that momentum and anger is going to roll all the way into November. And so they've tabled the issue. I expect them fully to bring it back. But it shows that when we stand up, it does make a difference. And I think that's one of the moral lessons of this moment, that we all have a moral obligation to use our voice.
One of the things, I mean, I'm a big sports fan and a Knicks fan. I'm actually a Warriors fan. I'm from the Bay Area, so I'm a Steph Curry fan. But I live in New York, and so I got to enjoy rooting for our home team. And one of the things that I love about the Knicks, who have famously disastrous first quarters, is they seem really expert on knowing what levers they can still press, right? Because I think one of the things that hurts the pro democracy side is that politics can feel over here when politics is right here, right? It's what's happening in your house. It's what happens when your kids go to school. And on this idea of what levers we can still press, it is the levers that they pressed in Hungary after, I don't know what, 12, 16 years of Orban.
Orban.
It is turnout, it is enthusiasm, it is protest. But I want to talk about all the progress they've made because all those things are designed to overcome voter suppression predicated on a lie. There isn't voter fraud in the country, and yet almost 500 voter suppression laws either passed or were introduced after the 2020 election. How insidious and dangerous is it that I don't even think it's half the country, but 30% of the country or a chunk of Trump's voters believe this lie that there are people who commit the crime, the non existent crime practically of voter fraud?
Nicole, explain something to me that I've been trying to figure out. How is it that in the 2020 election, which went into a 2021 runoff, how is it that John Ossoff and I won fraudulently, but all the Republicans on the same ballot in a congressional delegation that's mostly Republican, their election was perfectly, on the level.
This is my favorite question so this was my favorite question when I covered January 6th. I'm like, find me the ballots because their names are on the same ones that they're now calling fraudulent. I mean, the whole ruse, the whole scam is that, and I remember thinking the insurrectionists must not also be voters, right? Because if you voted and you voted for Jim Jordan, say,
Right.
it was the same piece of paper.
Same.
So they're saying that the fraud was only on the line where
So
they picked president. It's insane.
it's just it is insane, and it speaks to the deep tribalism that and the fires of that Donald Trump has been able to stir up. These are people behaving more like they're in a cult than in a party. Reason goes completely out of the window.
Right.
It's already illegal for non-citizens to vote, and non-citizens don't vote in this country. I
We can
mean,
barely get citizens to vote. I mean,
you're right.
it's crazy.
You're more likely to get struck by lightning. What we do know is that these voter suppression bills do just that. They suppress turnout. We know that for sure. In the Shelby versus Holder decision, the idea was, look, Barack Obama's been elected president. We don't need these guardrails. We don't need pre-clearance in
Mhm.
Section 5. And so they removed it.
Yeah.
And Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, we're getting rid of our umbrella in the midst of a rainstorm because we're not getting wet. And her words
Mhm.
proved to be prophetic. And it's important for me, I think, to underscore this because people see me. Yeah, I got elected in Georgia.
Mhm.
But here, that's true. But what's also true is that the gap in racial voter turnout since that awful Shelby decision in 2013 has widened. It has not narrowed, and it's widened twice as fast in the states that used to be under preclearance.
Mhm.
And so the evidence is there for anybody who wants to see it. And the Supreme Court had those outcomes, they had that evidence available to them. And instead of saying, we better be careful here, they doubled down. So now, even after you overcome the barriers which states can return to engaging in, moving polls without, all of the tricks. So now, even after you've overcome all of those barriers to vote, the impact of your showing up has been diminished because partisan actors now can draw any kind of crazy gerrymandering line that they
Right.
want if they think it will keep them in office. Let me hasten to say, if I had my druthers, we would get rid of gerrymandering. We would get rid of it all. But what the Supreme Court just did a few weeks ago is they took a side in a partisan fight
Mhm.
because the racial lines and the partisan lines in the South cannot be completely disaggregated. There are historic reasons why Black people are overwhelmingly Democrat. And so pretending that, well, we're not going to allow for these majority minority districts, we're going to ban those, but we're going to allow partisan gerrymandering. which is based on race, is to take a partisan side. The Roberts Court has done and is continuing to do a lot of damage to our democracy, to our whole democracy, not just black voters, brown voters, not just people of color, women, and then all of us through that awful Citizens United case, which they have now made worse with the decision this week. Our system is overrun with money and corruption, and the voices of ordinary people are consistently being squeezed out of their democracy. That's a bad outcome for all of us, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. It's a bad outcome for poor and working class people. And I think because we are now seeing the conditions set for continuing wealth inequality, ultimately, it's a bad deal for rich people too. It's a bad deal for corporations.
I need to ask you after that answer how you guard against despair personally and as a country.
I pray. That's the short answer. I'm a Christian, and my parents taught me the importance of prayer as a kid, and so I dig deep into the wellspring of my own spiritual walk with God. And mornings are important for me. That's my quiet time, devotional time. But also, look, I take the long view. Uh, we've seen bigots before, we've seen tyrants
Mhm.
before, and I live in Atlanta. Some of my mentors and the people that I brush shoulders against are the likes of John Lewis. I was his pastor. Although he was the mentor, I was his pastor. And Andy Young is still with us.
Yeah.
I knew C.T. Vivian, who took an actual beating fighting for voting rights. If you ever get a chance, whoever's listening to me, just Google the name if you've never heard him. Reverend C.T. Vivian, also recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, standing there in the courthouse door, just making the most eloquent argument for voting rights while literally being brutalized under the color of law.
You can turn your back on me, but you cannot turn your back upon the idea of justice. You can turn your back now and you can keep the club in your hand, but you cannot beat down justice. And we will register to vote because as citizens of these United States, we have the right to do it.
So when the courts play with us like this, they're playing with our dead. Our ballot is soaked in blood. It is a sacred thing. It is not to be played with, and it's not to become something to be weaponized in partisan fights. This is so much bigger. But I take the long view. I look at people like John Lewis, who had no reason to believe that he could win.
Mm.
I don't when he was crossing that bridge, I don't think he was thinking about a Presidential Medal of Freedom. I'm sure he wasn't. I'm sure it never occurred to him that when he died, his funeral would be at Ebenezer Church and three
Three,
presidents
yeah.
would be there on both sides of the aisle, including your old boss,
Mhm.
George Bush, because they all respected him. I,
Mhm.
I think he was just trying to stay alive that day
Mhm.
so he could live to fight the next day, but by some stroke of grace mingled with human determination, he crossed the bridge, built the bridge at the same time, and I was able, in a real sense, to walk over that bridge decades later to become the first black senator from the state of Georgia. Um, our country goes through these moments, these fits and starts, and I take my cue from the likes of John Lewis. When you don't know what else to do, keep walking. Keep walking across that bridge.
I think I mean, it makes it makes me want to cry, and it makes me emotional because I think that it cuts through and makes most people want to be that better country. But the Trump attack on voting rights includes erasing our history,
Yeah.
and so I guess where I feel um, I don't know challenged is how do you keep the faith when the history that gives you strength is the history that Trump and his enablers want to erase.
Oh, you keep telling that story.
We just keep, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, tragically, but also, ironically, their efforts to erase it shows its power.
right.
Same thing I tell young people about their vote. Oh, voting doesn't matter. Well, if it doesn't matter, why are people trying so hard to make it difficult? They
Right.
obviously they've seen your power, and so we have to keep telling the stories. I'm a part of a generation of children whose parents were fighting for the MLK birthday to be a holiday. I remember when it wasn't a holiday. And I was an elementary school student, and there was a movement. Stevie Wonder and others were involved when he
Yeah.
made the famous birthday song. And before they made it a holiday, our parents pulled us out of school. Someone needs to tell that story because it was happening in Georgia, all across the country. They pulled us out of school on Dr. King's birthday, and we spent all day in churches and at the local YMCA in lock-ins learning about the movement all day. Our parents took responsibility for that. So I'm saying that Donald Trump doesn't own this history. He doesn't know it. He revels in his own ignorance. Uh, and we can't give them more power than they have.
Yeah.
So the time will come, and we will continue to push for this in terms of public policy, making sure that it's taught in our schools, but in our churches and in our neighborhoods and in our communities, we have to keep telling the story.
Let me go back to your election. So on our end at MSNBC, it was still COVID. So Rachel was in one studio in New York. She was on the third floor. I think I was on the fourth floor in another studio in New York. Joy Reid was in a studio in DC, I mean, we were all separated, but we were all anchoring together, and it was such a huge deal. And one of the lines in the book that I find myself thinking about almost every day is that we have moved closer to the politics of January 6th, the day of the insurrection, than January 5th, which I think is the day you were elected. Will you
Right.
talk about that?
Yeah, as we approach this 250th anniversary of the nation, I write this book, which is literally it's a sermon to the country. And I point out in the Crooked Places Made Straight that I was elected on January 5th, 2021. Kid who grew up in public housing, first college graduate in my family, pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church where Dr. King served, but elected alongside the first Jewish senator and the son of an immigrant. And how this is my America. This is the country that I dream of. And we were all feeling a lot of joy that morning. The next morning, I was on all the morning shows.
Yeah.
I teased my family. I said, "I know I've arrived now. I'm on The View talking to Whoopi Goldberg."
She's the best. She's the best. I remember that. Yeah.
And that was that morning, but it was a short-lived
Yeah.
celebration. By lunchtime, my phone began to buzz with alerts, and we all know the rest of that awful story. It was January 6th. And there are those who say January 6th is not who we are. And I know what they mean when they say that, but it's not true. We are January 6th, and we're also January 5th. We are the country where a kid who's the first college graduate in his family can be a U.S. senator, an African American and a Jew can get elected, um, which brings remembrances of King and Abraham Joshua Heschel marching alongside each other. We're also January 6th, the ugly underbelly of the American story, that tension. Do we want to be the beacon of freedom in the world, or do we want to be something else? We live in that tension, and it was there from the founding. And we've seen various iterations of it, from slavery through segregation, and we just have to continue to fight. But we got to be clear-eyed about it. The insurrectionist president was reelected. He's back in the office. So clearly we are January 6th.
Hmm.
That is part of who we are.
Hmm.
But I really don't despair over America. My hope is in this experiment, this wild and radical idea of government by and for and through the people. And we just have to refuse to surrender that.
Why do you think there are people who don't look at their own circumstances and how much worse they are? I mean, inflation is objectively, statistically, undeniably higher. Gas prices, because of the war in Iran, are statistically, objectively, indisputably higher. Groceries are more expensive. He said all this stuff is going to be cheaper. I mean, why do you think there are people for whom the America of January 6th is more appealing than a better quality of life and lower cost of living for their families?
Well, I go to red rural districts in Georgia. And, Georgia's a place where we haven't expanded Medicaid, the Republicans in the state house. And so we've had a number of hospitals to close in Georgia, and all of them except one were in rural districts, mostly rural red districts. Those SNAP cuts that we saw in the one big ugly bill disproportionately impacting people in these red districts. I think some people are seeing it. You look at Donald Trump's numbers, they're in the tank. I think he's right on course to be held accountable in November, which is why they're engaging all of these tricks. I
Hmm.
can tell you that as a candidate, as someone who won twice in Georgia, that you've got to go out and talk to the people.
Hmm.
And, I had a 159 county strategy. There's no place I'm unwilling to go in Georgia and talk to the people because, look, I may still lose that county. That's fine. I just need to narrow the margins.
Hmm. Hmm.
At the end of the day, an election is a math problem. What is the coalition that can get me over the finish line? And so I just think it's important for us to talk to one another because here's the thing. Thanks to the ways in which our system is awash in money, even when ordinary people on the left and the right agree, we can't get the things done. Like there is more agreement between ordinary people on the left and the right, say on an issue like gun safety,
Right.
than our politics and what we've been able to pass would suggest. Fox News poll said 87% of Americans want universal background checks as we watch our children being massacred on any random day in America. And yet we can't even get a vote on that in
Hmm.
Congress. Well, the prophet Isaiah, who's the basis for this sermon that's become this book, in the very first chapter, Nicole, Isaiah says, your princes, and by that he means politicians. He says, your princes are rebels, companions with thieves. Everyone is seeking a bribe. They're all chasing after gifts. They do not hear the concerns of the orphan, and the concerns of the widow does not come before them. He could have been talking about 21st century America, dark money, saying that
Totally.
literally because your princes are on the take, someone else controls them. And so widows and orphans, those would have been the folks who are the most marginalized in the society, the people who would need SNAP, the people who would need a little help getting some health care. He said that their concerns don't come before you because you're being controlled by bribes. And we have a system of legalized bribery in our
Hmm.
country. I was proud of the fact that because I got elected, Democrats passed a bill in 2022 to finally give Medicare the ability to negotiate the price of prescription drugs. But think about that. Number one, why did we have to pass a law so Medicare could negotiate? What
Right.
kind of
Could get the best deal for America.
they
It's
get permission to negotiate?
But it gets to your larger point of that doesn't serve anybody. I mean,
Right,
that's not a partisan structural problem. It's just a structural problem. And
right.
I guess what I want to understand is actually you and your fellow senator from Georgia um, managed to do both and to point to the corruption, the greed. I mean, there's something so gluttonous about watching Donald Trump's White House. There's something so over the top. I mean, I think of
Yeah.
dark money as a problem that's existed. I mean, McCain-Feingold tried to deal with it when I was working in Washington. And that was a bipartisan effort to get at what you're talking about, to get the American taxpayer a better deal, to get some of the money out of politics.
Right.
But on top of the structural problems, and the Supreme Court made them worse this week, on top of that, there is now a brazenness with which Trump takes airplanes from foreign governments. And he made $2 billion. He made more money as president than he ever made as a TV star or real estate person. That feels like something gluttonous on top of something structurally broken.
Oh, there's no question about it. These issues are structural, as you point out. We've seen them over decades. Citizens United, I would argue, is an inflection point that made it a whole lot worse. And then the
Mhm.
Supreme Court doubled down on it this week. But yeah, Donald Trump, it's a good deal for him to be president. He's made more money than ever. He said he was going to do something about for our families, and apparently charity begins at home. So he started with his own family.
His
He just
sons.
he's and his sons. He just doesn't remember the rest of our families. I mean,
Yeah.
we literally have evidence that folks were making bets on the war.
Mm, it's crazy.
People literally trades happening at 3 o'clock in the morning based on information we find out an hour later regarding the war in Iran. It is boundless, unabashed corruption, shameless. It's in your face.
How do you tie that to a persuasive argument to people who might say, "Well, I don't see myself in the Democratic Party." Do you do you make an argument about tribalism? Do you make an argument about I mean, what does that conversation sound like when you're in these red districts?
Well, think about yourself. Maybe because I'm a pastor, when I ran in my races, I seldom talked about Democrats and Republicans
Mm,
because I don't see the world primarily through that lens. I'm a pastor who ran for the first time and got elected to the Senate. But I don't think most people, when they wake up in the morning, think about themselves as Democrats and Republicans. And the issue is who's going to center the concerns of working class people. There's a lot being made of the elections that happened in New York, what happened in Colorado,
mhm.
and I would argue that while some folks are interested in the ideological debate, most people don't think about these issues in those terms. Those are academic arguments happening among privileged people. But everyday people, everyday Americans who don't have $400 for an emergency, who cannot afford to buy their first home in a country where the average age of the first time home buyer is 40, whose healthcare premiums were doubled because they wouldn't extend the premium tax credits. Those folks want to know who sees them.
Mm.
Who who actually can see me and understand the concerns of ordinary people, and who will fight for me? And I think that that's the thing that our candidates who are winning, whether they are all the way on the left or moderates, that's the thing they have in common is that they're talking out of a place of authenticity that sees the concerns of ordinary people. And while we may disagree on some of the solutions, my worry is I don't want to see us, have a circular firing squad
Right.
about ideological differences, even in our party. I think that's a sign of a healthy party with a big tent. What we have to remember is that we are fighting an authoritarian, and there's nothing inside of this tent that's more urgent and more threatening than Donald Trump and his enablers in Congress.
I agree with you, but I hear from a lot of Democrats who are worried that this brand of democratic socialism is something to be afraid of. How do you dispel those fears?
I lived in New York as a young person for 10 years. I went to seminary in New York. As one candidate famously said a few years ago, it was a whole party. The rent's too damn high.
I follow that guy. I mean, look, New York is ridiculous, and I have a very young staff. That I mean, you can't be too far from the real lived experience of being 21 years old and trying to live in a city where you can't afford anything. You can't afford to live in the safe neighborhoods. Can't afford healthcare. Can't afford a quality of life that has you out and about, not home and alone. I mean, I get all of it, but I see my former party as the gravest threat to the future of our democracy. And I don't know how we survive 2.5 more years of it. I am certain we don't survive a JD Vance presidency. And so I guess I'm asking you from a place of worry, not judgment.
Well, I think if you're not concerned, you're not paying attention. It's a tough time, and the stakes are so very, very high. But again, I look at the elections in New York, the election in New Jersey, the elections in Virginia.
Hmm.
We are managing to get candidates elected across the ideological spectrum. And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, we have to put together a coalition to win. And I think if the American people give us a shot at this, where we're in power, I think there's going to be a lot of onus on us to move swiftly, to move boldly. Our part of why we're here is our vision has not been big enough. I think politics happens right now in a very narrow scheme of what's possible because of the ways in which the politics is owned by self-interest. We've got to make sure that we win in 26.
Mhm.
And if we can get a trifecta come 2028, if we don't do the things that are necessary to save this democracy and put us on a path and where we can have a future big enough for all of our children, then shame on us. So I'm focused on that work.
How do you make voting rights a nonpartisan issue? I mean, I think it's crazy that Republicans don't look at our history and say, look, if our ideas are as great as we think. I mean, Thomas Massey just
Right,
said this. He said, what
right,
is the problem with elections? We literally won everything. We won the
right.
Supreme Court. We won the White House. We won the Senate. We won the House. Like, there's no problem with our elections.
I think it's ironic that we control the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the White House, and we're yelling election fraud. I mean, we won all the damn elections. And we're in charge, and what are we doing with it? We're bankrupting the country, we're starting new wars, we're violating the Constitution, we're not cracking down on the fraud. The problem is not the elections. We won the damn elections. The problem is we're wasting our opportunity that the voters gave us.
It feels like the lie of voter fraud and then all of the things that the lie puts in motion. I think almost 500 voter suppression bills that eliminated the safest ballots. The drop boxes, I think, are some of the safest ballots. They've got the signature. So, I mean, what they did was all upside down and backwards. And I think it's insane that voting rights is the work of one party and not even all of it all the time. And I know you write in your book about how maybe voting rights should have been the first big legislative priority of President Biden's and that the filibuster should have been examined. There were people watching what happened in Georgia, watching the voter suppression law that was passed in Georgia after Raffensperger and Kemp were the ones who sort of walked the line against Donald Trump's efforts to steal that election. It was crazy that they were the guys that then signed a voter suppression law so extreme that Major League Baseball moved their All-Star game that year. How did we get in this place where everyone like a zombie stumbles and passes and advocates and makes excuses for voter suppression laws when they know that the lie of voter fraud is just that, a lie?
When you and I were talking a moment ago about the importance of knowing your history, here's a reminder of some recent history. The last time the voting rights bill was reauthorized, George W. Bush
I was in the room. Yeah.
was
Yeah.
president, and it passed the Senate 98-0.
0. Yeah.
So this is a different party. This is a although I think there were seeds planted that got us here, but this is a turning point in the uh, history of our politics. And the great thing about our country is, yeah, we have robust and sometimes rambunctious arguments
Mm.
about bread and war, and the size of government and all of these things that seem like such quaint little arguments now. We used to fight over them so vociferously.
Yes.
They all feel very quaint when we're trying to save the democracy itself. I fight so hard for this, and it's the first two chapters in my book. One is on voting rights, second on dark money, because these are not just issues alongside other issues. Pick your issue, whatever it is. You could say, well, climate change is an existential threat to our very survival, and it is. But the democracy is the house we live in. It's the context in which we get to fight
Hmm.
for all of these things. And so for me, it is fundamental. It is sacred. I believe that a vote is a kind of prayer for the
Hmm.
world we desire for ourselves and for our children. And so, yeah, I look back at that time and I'm proud of what we did. I entered Congress at a time when, I mean, wow, the size and scope of legislation we pass, one seldom sees. You could
Mhm.
have seen that in a 40-year career. It was in my first 2 years of Congress.
Mhm.
We passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We passed CHIPS and science. We passed a large investment in our veterans who were the victims of burn pits in these two wars. We passed the first gun safety bill in 30 years. Heck, we passed the largest clean energy bill in human history, and in that was the prescription drug thing where we capped the cost of prescription drugs. If I were to go back and have all of those things in one hand and the two voting rights bills and Supreme Court reform and things that would broaden the democracy, take, for instance, DC statehood. I think I might take those things over all of those bills because what we're
Right.
witnessing is if you don't save the democracy,
Mhm.
you can have a runaway Supreme Court undermine all the progress that we made, much of it bipartisan progress.
I interviewed Joe Biden and I asked him that question about Supreme Court reform, and it was the day of some disastrous decision, and you could just see his human struggle with his reverence for institutions and all the concerns you just articulated. Like I think somewhere in him was the same, you know, tug of war. But I agree with you, and I wonder if he could go back. Have you ever talked to Biden about it? Does he regret not doing voting rights?
I talked to him a lot when we were engaged in it. And let's be clear, we had all of the Dems were on this bill. We just had two Democratic senators who were unwilling to make any change around the filibuster. And again, we weren't trying to get rid of the filibuster. What we were trying to do would have locked the Senate down for weeks and would have exacted a lot of pain out of both sides. But we had two who are no longer in the Senate who were not willing to do what was necessary. And those of us who came to that conclusion, we didn't come there lightly. My concern, and this is what we're living, my concern was that if we didn't do something, we could cross a Rubicon where it would be difficult to get back. And um, I just wish that at the end of the day, we could have found a way to get these things done.
Do you feel optimistic about the next 6 months and the next 2 years?
I think if we have a fair election, we will definitely flip the House. And I think we have a very, very good case, very, very good chance of flipping the Senate. I remain hopeful about our country. I do. Again, maybe because I'm the pastor of Ebenezer Church, I think a lot about the civil rights movement. And, we think about those victories as if they were inevitable. They were actually quite improbable. And the folks kept fighting. Andy Young tells me this wonderful story, and I tell it in the book, about how when they passed the civil rights bill into law, Dr. King went to see President Johnson with some of his lieutenants, and Johnson was proud of the fact that he had signed the civil rights bill into law, and Dr. King said, "Yes, wonderful victory, Mr. President. I need a voting rights law," without skipping a beat.
Yeah, yeah.
And President Johnson kept saying in various ways, I get it, Martin. I understand, Dr. King, but I can't get that done right now. Do you know how much political capital I had to spend to get this over the finish line? I don't have the power to do it. They left the meeting. The staff was feeling all dejected. And they began to say, what are we going to do? The president of the United States says he doesn't have the power to get us to vote. And Dr. King said, well, if the president doesn't have the power, I guess we're going to have to go to the South and get him some power. The power's in the people.
Yeah.
It's not the people in power. The power's in the people. And I think whether you look at the citizens who stood up bravely night after night in the blistering cold in Minneapolis, and I saw as a southern guy how cold it was.
It's freezing. Like you understand bone-chilling cold
Yeah,
when you feel there.
bone-chilling
Yeah.
cold. Or the folks who stood up in my own state of Georgia 2 weeks ago when they were getting ready to gerrymander those maps. it makes a difference when you push back and stand up. So don't give in to those who are trying to weaponize despair. For those of us who are people of faith, I call upon us to renew our faith. But if you're not given to that kind of language, um, I'm also calling on us to renew our faith in one another
Mm.
as an American people. Donald Trump is trying to divide us so that he can dominate us. And at the end of the day, we're all we've got. And we ought to spend some more time talking to people with whom we deeply, deeply disagree. Um, because at the end of the day, this experiment is about the question of whether you can actually have a people, not based on race, not based on ethnicity or even religion, but a people who are in covenant with one another, and who see this land as a beacon of freedom with all of its scars, who will tell the truth about the brutality, the ugly side of it, and yet are committed to building a future that's big enough for all of our children. Uh, it, that's the only way any of us can make it is if all of us make it.
You are someone who I have followed since the earliest days of your campaign. I was so honored when you agreed to come on the show, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for all of your time today. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you. Keep the faith.